Three Lives to Live by Anne Lindbergh. Copyright 1992. Hot off the press, the only authorized autobiography of Garrett Atkins, 7B, Whetstone Academy for Girls, Mrs. Megorian's third period English class. Footnote, directed by Mrs. Megorian. Auto, from the Greek autos, self. Bio, from the Greek bios, life. Graphy, from the Greek graphos, written. Autobiography, the story of one's life, written by oneself. Chapter 1, First Draft. The story of my life, written by myself? Who is she trying to kid? At best, this will be the story of my life as Mrs. Megorian thinks I ought to write it. I'll give you the truth and nothing but the truth, but don't expect the whole truth. At least not unless Mrs. Megorian gets sick and we have an open-minded substitute. Here goes. My life was a happy one until last week when Daisy got her laptop computer. Though if I'd been smart, I would have guessed my happy days were over back in September when Daisy got her learning disability. Of course, it didn't occur to Daisy to become learning disabled until she got her canopy bed last August. So let's just say that my troubles began in July when I got my twin sister Daisy. Mrs. Megorian says I have to start over. She says that this is supposed to be my story, not Daisy's. There's no way it will be the whole truth without Daisy in it. But I warned you, right? Chapter 1, Second Draft. Riddle. When is a sister no longer a sister? Answer. When you desist her. I wish. Get it? Mrs. Megorian says this won't do either. She says you can desist an action, but not a person. She also says that the professional author would allow his readers to draw their own conclusion about Daisy. Chapter 1, Third Draft. The girls in 7B are writing autobiographies for SWAP, which stands for Student Writing Achievement Project. Next month, the famous author is going to judge the project and give out prizes. We don't know which author because the headmistress hasn't found one yet who wants to do it. Meanwhile, everyone in school is writing something, but only 7B gets to use the school computers. How did we luck out? Because the girls in 7B are supposed to be bad writers. At least not as good writers as the girls in 7A. Which happens to be totally untrue. I may be a messy writer. It may take me longer to write in cursive than it takes Daisy, for example, but I'm a lot faster than Daisy on a keyboard, and I have a whole lot more to say. I told Mrs. Megorian this, but all she said was, "That's nice, Garrett. Your autobiography will give you a chance to prove it." Why are we writing autobiographies instead of stories or poems like the rest of the school? Because according to Mrs. Megorian, we're not only bad writers, we're also uninspired writers. If you write about yourselves, at least you'll never run out of subject matter, she explained. Then she switched to her preachy voice and added, "Remember, you only have one life to live. It won't hurt you to take an honest look at it, will it now, girls?" "When I look at my life, all I see is Daisy," I informed her. "Daisy has a cute little trick of occupying center stage, haven't you noticed? Besides, I owe it to the world to reveal her deep, dark secrets. Who is she? Where did she come from? How long does she intend to stay?" "I'm more concerned with your own deep, dark secrets," Mrs. Megorian said. I warned her that my life was as dull as dishwater, but she just switched to her preachy voice again and said that any observant human being should be able to list 3 interesting things that happened to him every day. By him, she meant me. "Breakfast, lunch, and dinner?" I suggested. The other girls thought this was funny. Mrs. Megorian did not. "We should eat to live, not live to eat," she said. Then she looked at me straight in the eye and told me she hoped I'd rise above my obsession with food and have the courage to show her a little of the real Garrett Atkins. "If you want reality, how come I have to leave Daisy out of it?" I asked. Mrs. Megorian said it was my life, not Daisy's. Funny, that's exactly what I told my grandmother after Daisy fell off the canopy bed last August. My exact words happened to have been, "It's my life, isn't it?" And my grandmother's answer was, "Daisy is part of your life now." I tried it on Mrs. Megorian. "Daisy is part of my life now." Mrs. Megorian's answer was, "Daisy can write her own autobiography, but Daisy is in 7A. Question. Why is Daisy in 7A if she has a learning disability? Answer. She faked the learning disability. That's why. But I'm going to save Daisy's fake learning disability for later because Mrs. McGorian says the professional author needs to keep his readers' interest by creating an aura of a suspense. She also says that to get the reader's interest in the first place, the professional author introduces his main character in an offbeat way. My main character is me, but I can't just write, "My name is Garrett Atkins. I have brown hair and hazel eyes. I'm 13 and I deserve my own computer." Mrs. Gregorian says this kind of introduction is too conventional. She says to read some really good books and notice the subtle ways that characters are introduced. She says I'll find some useful gimmicks. I already know those gimmicks. One of them goes like this. A slim, mature-looking girl walked past Computer Shack without casting a glance at the laptop model that her grandmother didn't give her for her 13th birthday because she gave it to her twin sister Daisy instead. The next door window had a mirror. The slim, mature-looking girl stopped to look in it so she could wipe the crystal tears off her cheek. The face she saw in the mirror wasn't as pretty as Daisy's face, but it showed a lot more character. It had brown hair cut an inch above her ear on one side and an inch below on the other. It had hazel eyes. It was her own face. She also saw that she forgot to change out of her barf green gym suit so she could read the name tape in the mirror. It said Snikta Turag. Mrs. McGorian just walked down my row and paused when she got to me. She says to try writing my autobiography the way she says to do it instead of telling all the ways she says not to do it. Mrs. McGorian also says to stop saying what Mrs. McGorian says. Chapter 1, Final Draft. Like I wrote before I was so rudely interrupted, I've led a happy life. I was born on October 29th, 1980. Until Daisy turned up, the only bad thing that happened to me was the death of my parents when I was 2, which hardly counts because I don't remember. Ever since then, I've lived with Gratkins in her big, old-fashioned house that was built a century ago. Gratkins, short for Grandmother Atkins, was born in that house in 1930, long before our crowded neighborhood grew up around it. She had 8 brothers and sisters, so the house is used to children. I'm used to my grandmother if it comes to that. I've always rated her way above my friends' parents. At least I did until Daisy came into the picture and things began to change. So how did Daisy come into the picture? Mrs. McGorian says it's high time I told you. She came down the laundry chute, that's how. Most houses don't have a laundry chute, but most houses aren't like ours. Our house has 9 bedrooms, more closets than I care to count, and miles of corridor. Gratkins and I only use a fraction of that space. Back when she was a kid, it was a different story. Apart from her huge family, there was also a live-in cook, plus a maid named Lena. According to Gratkins, when Lena wasn't waiting on table, she washed clothes in the cellar. The way the clothes got there was down the laundry chute. All my great-grandmother had to do was lift this wooden flap and drop them in. When the chute was installed, it was considered a labor-saving device. If you ask me, it didn't save much labor for Lena, but people back then thought it was pretty cool. You can tell by the writing on the flap. Be 50 years ahead of your time. Acme Superior Household Products give you a new lease on life. The chute is a thing of the past now, for 2 reasons. In the first place, we do our wash in the Sears washer and dryer in the kitchen. In the second place, my great-grandparents nailed the flap shut when Gratkins was 13. I asked why, but Gratkins wouldn't say. She believes it's rude to ask people questions about their past. I happen to disagree, but that's besides the point. The point is, how did Daisy get in? Since I don't know, I'll tell you instead how she got out. It happened during a heat wave last July. I woke up grouchy, and my temper didn't improve as the day grew hotter. Gratkins finally ordered me to take a book down to the cellar to cool off. Our cellar has thick stone walls with dusty slits of windows up near the ceiling that the sun can barely filter through. It's cool, but it's also damp and crawling with spiders. Gratkins meant business, though, so I went down. "Try the laundry room," she called after me. "There used to be a good bright light in there, over the sink." There still was, and by a miracle the sink was spider-free, so I climbed in. It was fairly comfortable as long as I scrunched around the faucets. I was peacefully reading when I heard a noise like an indoor avalanche. I looked up, and with my own eyes I saw a girl come skidding out of the laundry chute and land flat on her back in what seemed like a mess of peach-colored tissue paper, but turned out to be her dress. She was pale and too scared to talk. Not me, though. I was firing questions at her before she had time to catch her breath. Who was she, and how did she get into our laundry chute? It starts in the second floor linen closet just outside my room. What was she doing up there? And why was she wearing dress-up clothes? In her gauzy dress was a sash on her behind and a smocking on her front. She looked like a little girl at a birthday party, except for two things. She was my age, and she was covered with spider webs. Strange? Not as strange as the fact that Gratkins didn't ask her anything at all. When I brought the girl upstairs, she just smiled and said, "Why, hello, Daisy." I'll never forget how surprised that girl looked. I was surprised, too. "What is this?" I demanded. "Have you two met before?" The girl shook her head. Gratkins said, "You ask too many questions." She told me that Daisy's past was her own private business, and I had to quit prying into it. What Gratkins says goes, so I tried to keep my mouth shut. Even when we took Daisy in to live with us. Even when Gratkins told people that Daisy was my sister. Don't get the idea that I was happy, though. The truth is, I was furious. Not that I had anything personal against Daisy. Not at first, anyway. It's just that Gratkins and I had become kind of a couple, and as the saying goes, three's a crowd. It was the sister's business that bothered me the most. In my opinion, it was a mistake. Since Daisy was obviously my age, people assumed we were twins. Gratkins had to agree. What else could she do? All the same, I think she should have consulted me. It's not so terrific having a twin sister because people compare you all the time. If I had any choice in the matter, I'd have a brother instead. "I'm not asking a question," I told Gratkins. "I just want it on record that I wish I knew why this Daisy has to be my sister." She said, "You look like sisters. That's why." She's right. Daisy has the same color hair as me, and the same eyes, and the exact same dimple in her chin. That's as far as the resemblance goes, however. Daisy is skinny and a little shorter and has long hair. She's also prettier. But the main thing is that she doesn't behave like me. I pointed this out to the kids at school, but they said it wasn't surprising. They said naturally Daisy wouldn't behave like me since we'd been brought up separately until we were nearly 13. Then they'd want to know why we were separated. Daisy wouldn't breathe a word about her past, so I had to come up with a good story. The best I could think of was that after our parents died, we were split up between two sets of grandparents. "How come you never told us about her?" the kids would ask. "Pretty sneaky, Garrett." I had an answer for that one. Would you talk about your twin sister if she was as weird as Daisy? Because face it, there is something weird about Daisy. How comes Gratkins knew her, but she didn't know Gratkins? And how come she knew her way around? In our house, that's not easy. Some of my friends still get lost, but not Daisy. She knew where the bathroom was and the way back to the back stairs. Our back stairs are so hard to find that they almost count as secret. On the other hand, the stuff that was in the house really freaked her out. The microwave oven, for instance, and the television set. She spent the first evening switching channels with the remote control. Since then, she's been hooked. It makes no difference what she watches. Soaps, sports, commercials, she loves it all. TV is what finally convinced her that I looked like other kids. At first, she got such a kick out of my clothes and my hairstyle that it was insulting. "Your hair is that way on purpose?" she kept asking. "And honestly, nobody laughs?" But as I said, I had nothing against her at first. Except maybe for the way Gratkins spoiled her. Which brings me back to the canopy bed. We shared my bedroom for the first few weeks. Gratkins put an extra mattress on my floor and we took turns sleeping on it, which was fun. But then Gratkins said life wasn't one long slumber party and Daisy should have her own room. Now, when I wrote that we live in a big old-fashioned house, I didn't say a big, rich old-fashioned house. Not that it looks poor either. It just looks empty. In most of those 9 bedrooms, there's not a stick of furniture. Gratkins had to sell off the antiques before she could afford my tuition at Whetstone. In other words, the problem wasn't so much a room for Daisy as a bed to put in it. "I'll have to buy one," said Gratkins. She sounded worried, but nowhere near as worried as when she remembered the academy. "I'd better go have a talk with the headmistress while I'm out. I'm afraid this means double the tuition come fall." I saw no cause for worry. Can't Daisy just go to Whetstone Junior High? She gave me a cold look. If anyone switches to public school, it should be you. You've led a privileged life up to this day. Daisy has been less fortunate. How do you know? I asked. Gratkin scowled at me. No questions. Why not? I asked. Why is it rude to ask about the past? If other people thought like you, there'd be no history. She didn't answer, so I took advantage of her silence to suggest switching us both to public school. Not on your life, Gratkin snapped. Not even if it means mortgaging the house. I knew she'd say no. When she was growing up, she went the whole way through the public school system, wishing she could wear a barf green gym suit with her name tape on the pocket. Her parents couldn't afford to send her to the academy because of all those brothers and sisters. I would have been thrilled to save her some money by switching to Whetstone Junior High, but did I get a chance? Dream on, Garrett. My last hope was that Daisy would back me up, but Daisy had her heart set on the academy. She didn't even change her mind once she got there. She settled right in, and wouldn't you know it, after just one day of classes, she got moved to 7A. It's bad enough having a twin sister who's prettier than you are. Try having one who's smarter than you are, too. It was the unfair combination of smart and pretty that got Daisy the canopy bed. By now, you're supposed to be itching to know the story of the canopy bed. I've mentioned it several times already. Mrs. Megorian says this is called foreshadowing, and it's something the professional author does in case you're too dumb to guess what's going to be as important in his book. That bed is important, all right, and now I'll tell you why. When Mrs. Megorian read this, she said, "That's better, Garrett. See what you can do when you make an effort." Chapter 2. I was right when I said this would be the story of my life as Mrs. Megorian thinks I ought to write it. After 4 beginnings, I was hoping to get down to business. But she says at first I have to put in a flashback. Even the writers in 7B know that a flashback is when you ruin a good story by stopping to tell about something that happened earlier. I find this a little tedious, but authors do it anyway. In order not to confuse you, they put their flashbacks in italic print. That's the slanty one. The Whetstone Academy computers can't handle italics. Daisy's laptop will, but Daisy isn't in a lending mood. Who cares? When I finish my autobiography, I'll send it to a publisher. It will be a bestseller, and the book flap will say, "Miss Atkins wrote this masterpiece on a lousy school computer. Her sister had her own laptop, but she refused to lend it." My readers will ask, "Garrett Atkins has a sister? What's she like?" And people in the know will say, "Daisy is prettier and smarter, but otherwise she's kind of blah." So I'd better get my flashback over with, or I'll be trapped forever in Chapter 2. Mrs. Megorian says that knowing how to slide gracefully in and out of a flashback is a sign of the professional author, so it's good practice to put one in our autobiographies. She also says that a flashback should pivot on a useful gimmick, such as the scent of a rose or a familiar old tune that takes you back in time. Mine is shepherd's pie. Ready? First imagine me, slim, mature-looking 13-year-old Garrett. I'm sitting at a Whetstone Academy computer. My mind is partly on my work, but mostly on my lunch. Lunch isn't until after health and hygiene, but a nasty smell is already penetrating the computer room. I'm praying it isn't roadkill. The Academy boasts about delicious, nutritious cafeteria meals, but it's a well-known fact that the headmistress gets our meat straight off the nearest interstate. Sometimes it's crow, and sometimes it's cat. I suspect there's an occasional skunk. We had roadkill yesterday, but that doesn't mean we won't have it again today, served up as shepherd's roadkill pie. Shepherd's pie. Gratkins made shepherd's pie for supper the night I found out about Daisy's canopy bed. It was back in August, when I was still 12. So, now imagine me sitting in the kitchen. Why the kitchen? Because the dining room doesn't have a table, that's why. It has floor-to-ceiling windows and a chandelier, but Gratkins sold the table to buy our VCR, which is why I'm at the kitchen table eating shepherd's pie. It would be a while yet before I grew slim and mature-looking. Meanwhile, I liked mashed potatoes a whole lot more than meat, even when the meat was cow, not crow. But Gratkins believes in eating everything on your plate, so the next thing you have to imagine is me feeling nauseated. I had one thing going for me, Daisy's attitude towards food. She's finicky. I don't mean she has no appetite. She eats like a horse in spite of being skinny. But nothing on her plate is allowed to touch anything else on her plate. If we have lima beans and corn, they have to be served in separate piles, and they have to stay that way. Even when they come as succotash, Daisy divides them up, then chews and swallows a mouthful of beans before she lets her fork so much as touch the corn. I tell her it turns into succotash again in her stomach, but she does it anyway. That evening last August, I was grateful for Daisy's attitude. It was easy to convince her that life would be simpler if she had all meat and I had all potatoes. We were negotiating a trade when Gratkins brought up the question of the bed. I remember the doting way she reached over and tugged on Daisy's ponytail. "How about it, Daisy? Have you made up your mind?" "Made up her mind about what?" I asked. Daisy batted her lashes and simpered at her plate. She was performing surgery on the shepherd's pie. By the time she finished, no one would guess the meat and potatoes had started out together. Unfortunately, the potatoes lost their appeal as they grew cold. "About what?" I repeated. Gratkins answered for her. "Daisy is moving into her own bedroom, remember? So she has to hurry up and choose a bed." I wasn't too happy about the move. My main concern, to be honest, was that I'm scared of the dark. If Daisy moved to another room, I'd have to deal with it again. Sure, we were crowded, but there were some alternatives. Why shouldn't Gratkins buy a bunk bed for my room? Or if she insisted on buying a second single bed, why couldn't Daisy and I move into a larger room? Both solutions seemed reasonable to me. But did Gratkins listen to reason? "Crowding stifles the spirit," she stated firmly. "There's not much I can offer Daisy on my narrow income, but for once she'll have her own space." "For once?" I echoed. "Does that mean you lived in a small house, Daisy? Or does it just mean that you come from a large family?" "We will return after these messages," said Daisy. What kind of answer was that? "Quit talking TV," I said. "I wish I came from a large family. They'd be all boys except for me. I'd like an older brother." "Oh, no, you wouldn't," Daisy mumbled through her mouthful of ground beef. "Why, do you have one?" I asked. "No questions, Garrett." Gratkins gave me a warning look, which changed to a smile as she waved a furniture catalog in the air. "That warehouse on Mount Pleasant Street is having a sale. Every bed in the store is going for half price." "Cool," I said. "Daisy wants bunk beds, don't you, Daisy?" I lunged across the table to grab the catalog, and Daisy tried to grab it back again. I could tell she didn't want me in on the choosing, but I didn't know why yet. "My birthday is only 2 months away," I reminded Gratkins. "How about bunk beds for my room?" Gratkins said not to get impatient. She already had a present in mind for me, and it was something I'd wanted for a long time. This was good news. The only thing I'd wanted for a long time was a computer. So I quit nagging her and flipped through the catalog in search of bunk beds that might appeal to Daisy. There were two different kinds on page 40. Nautical and Nordic. But what caught my attention was the bed on page 41. It was made of dark wood, polished to a rosy glow, and had 4 tall posts at the corners. The posts were there to hold up a flowery, flouncy piece of cloth that matched the flowery, flouncy quilt. The minute I saw it, I wanted it. In fact, I wanted it so badly that, for a while anyway, I forgot about the computer. Someone, and I knew it wasn't Gratkins, had drawn a heart around that bed with a red marker. The bunk beds didn't even have the corner of the page turned down. I looked suspiciously at Daisy. Daisy blushed. "It's high-impact romance at a low-impact price," she whispered. I waited for Gratkins to gag, but I should have known better. She actually thought Daisy was cute. "Let's hope they have it in stock," she said. "I'll give them a call in the morning." I was burning up inside, but I wasn't about to show it. "You're actually planning to sleep in that thing?" I asked Daisy, loading my voice with scorn. "You've got to be kidding. Who do you think you are, Scarlett O'Hara?" "I'm Daisy Atkins." She was still whispering, but it was a stubborn whisper. This made me burn even hotter. "Who says that's your name? Do you have any ID saying that's your name? I'm sick and tired of the Daisy Atkins mystery." I realized it was mean to pick on her just because Gratkins was buying her the bed I wanted for myself. It would have made more sense for me to be nice so she'd give me a chance to sleep in it once in a while, but I was jealous beyond reason. Half price means two for the price of one, I reminded Gratkins. If you get one for Daisy, you can get one for me too. Gratkins said that if the bed were on sale, she couldn't buy it at all. She told Daisy not to get her hopes up because sale items went fast, so maybe it was too late. But it wasn't too late. Not only did the warehouse have one of those canopy beds left, it also turned out they were delivering in our neighborhood the same day we telephoned. So Daisy moved into a room down the hall, and I was alone in the dark again. Now imagine me standing in the doorway of Daisy's new room. Inside the room are just two things: Daisy and her bed. The bed looked great except for not having a quilt like the picture in the catalog. The quilt was not on sale. But if you think this spoiled Daisy's pleasure, you're wrong. How do you like it? She asked. For something so cheap and tacky, it's not bad, I admitted. Can I sleep in here tonight? Daisy pointed out that there wasn't a second bed. That's okay, I said. I'll drag in the extra mattress. Daisy said there wasn't room. What do you mean there isn't room? I protested. There's nothing but room. Even after you get some other furniture, there'll be plenty of room. Daisy gave in. Why? Because she felt sorry for me. Why did she feel sorry for me? Because Gratkins decided to give me my birthday present ahead of time, and it was computer lessons. Not a computer, just lessons. When Daisy found out, she shook her head in a dazed kind of way. I can't believe it, she said. That's not a present. That's a punishment. I guess you didn't play your cards right. Daisy is a firm believer in playing your cards right. She thinks she does it, and I don't. She's correct. I was mad at Gratkins for a while, but once I started the course, I changed my mind. Not only was it fun, I also learned to type fast, which is helpful for my autobiography. In fact, I better come right out and admit that those lessons were a really good present. But Daisy couldn't know that back in August, so she let me sleep in her room. Here's the hitch. I couldn't sleep. The sight of the canopy bed was more than I could stand. What was I doing on the floor while this intruder lay like a princess in a nest of frills? It was bad enough, the way Daisy had moved in and taken over. The bed was the final straw. Now I hated her. Why are you staring at me in that funny way? Daisy asked after a while. It's not you, I said, cranking out a sardonic laugh. It's your bed. From down here it sure looks silly. Daisy's eyes grew all surprised and hurt. It's not silly. It's romantic. I'm planning to have a bed just like this when I get married. Not me, I said. When I get married, I'll have bunk beds. My husband and I are going to take turns sleeping on the upper bunk. Daisy said that wasn't romantic. I said maybe not, but it sure would be fun. I told her she'd get bored with a flowery, flouncy canopy because it wasn't good for anything but looking at. If she had an upper bunk instead, she could look at it some nights and sleep on it others. Daisy said she could sleep on the canopy if she felt like it. It doubles as a hammock, she informed me. It does not, I said. It does so, Daisy said. Prove it, I said. I will someday, said Daisy. Right now I don't feel like it. That's because you're chicken and you know you're wrong, I said. It is not, said Daisy. It is so, I said. So she shinnied up a post to prove it, and there was this awful cracking, ripping noise. Daisy screamed and... Chapter 3. Fell. Which is how the professional author ends his chapters. The reason being, according to Mrs. Megorian, that he likes to leave you in suspense. Personally, I could do without too much suspense, especially if the chapter is read aloud by a person who won't start the next one till tomorrow. Daisy's accident was no big deal, except that accidents are more expensive at night because you have to go to the emergency room. Daisy got 4 stitches under her chin, and I got talked to. Not yelled at, just talked to. The talk went something like this. Gratkins. I'm sorry this had to happen, Garrett. Garrett. Me too. If only Daisy had listened to me and chosen the bunk beds. Gratkins. Now, don't start that again, young lady. If you hadn't been there, this accident never would have occurred. Garrett. If Daisy hadn't been there, it never would have occurred, you mean. Gratkins. Do I detect the presence of a green-eyed monster? Garrett. Are you kidding? I think canopy beds are sleazy, and I wouldn't be Daisy for all the money in the world. Gratkins, giving me this long, reproachful look. I doubt there are many people who would want to be Daisy. Garrett. Silence. But this is what I was thinking. What's so bad about being Daisy? If I were Daisy, I'd be smart and pretty. If I were Daisy, Gratkins would spoil me. So the truth was that I'd give being Daisy a try for no money at all. Gratkins. It should be your life's purpose to see that Daisy feels loved and cherished, Garrett. Garrett. You can't tell me what my life's purpose should be. I mean, it's my life, isn't it? Gratkins. Daisy is part of your life now. By the time the doctor led Daisy out of the emergency room, guess who was crying? Not Daisy. Why should Daisy cry? She was getting the quilt that matched her canopy bed. Gratkins promised to buy it as a reward for being brave. That's the end of the canopy bed story. So now I'm going to flash forward again. Flashing forward is trickier than flashing back. I know from the books I've read that there are two ways of doing it. One is just to quit the italic print and start the normal print again. The other is for the heroine to give a little shiver as she comes to her senses and remembers she's back in the present. I'm bored with both ways, so I've invented a third. It's called the Useful Gimmick Flash Forward. And you guessed it, the gimmick is still shepherd's pie. Imagine Daisy and Garrett eating it, I should say trying to eat it, yet again, but this time in September. Gratkins has already finished and is reading the paper. She's a little hard of hearing, so she doesn't notice that Garrett is yet again begging Daisy to trade potatoes for meat. No thanks, says Daisy. Garrett is in trouble. She searches desperately for a way to dispose of her meat. She says, I wish we had a dog. Daisy said, why don't you ask for one? Garrett said, are you kidding? If it were that easy, I would have done it long ago. Daisy says, that's because you don't know the right way to ask. And I suppose you do, says Garrett. Gratkins looks up from the paper. She glances suspiciously from Garrett to Daisy and back to Garrett again. She thought she heard the beginning of a quarrel. She decides she was wrong and returns to her horoscope. Let's see you do it then, says Garrett. No thanks, says Daisy. I don't want a dog. Daisy gets on Garrett's nerves. Garrett loses her cool and calls Daisy a liar. Gratkins hears. She slaps her paper down on the table and asks Garrett to apologize to her sister. Garrett apologizes. Toward nightfall, Scorpios should opt for harmony, Gratkins read aloud. What's wrong with you girls? Who says Daisy's a Scorpio, I ask. Gratkins says, you ask too many questions. My eager young mind is hungry for knowledge, I tell her. You wouldn't want to starve my eager young mind, would you? Meanwhile, Daisy opts for harmony. Smiling primly at me, she takes a tiny bite of meat and wipes her fork on her napkin before taking a tiny bite of potato. Over the past week, she has become finickier than ever. Shepherd's pie is a real problem for her. You'd think Gratkins would get wise and eliminate it from the menu. Daisy finally swallows her last bite of potato and carries her plate to the sink. But later she has the nerve to tell Garrett that she, Daisy, can get pretty much anything she wants out of Gratkins. I got the canopy bed, didn't I? She asked. And then I got the matching quilt. Garrett laughed scornfully. You're trying to tell me you fell and cut yourself on purpose just so you could get that quilt? Of course not, says Daisy. I just mean that once I cut myself, I made the best of it. It's easy. You can do it too. Of all the tricky little manipulators. You mean if I break my arm or something, I'll get my own canopy bed? Daisy shrugged. Whatever. But you don't have to break your arm. If you want a dog, for instance, all you have to do is sit in front of the TV all day and stare at the screen. What's the catch? I ask. Daisy says the catch is that you don't turn the TV on. I tell her she has to be joking. TV bores me anyway. Watching it with the power off would be the pits. It depends on how much you want the dog, Daisy tells me with another shrug to show that she couldn't care less. If you really want the dog, you have to act disturbed. It would help if you stopped functioning at school, too. Stopped functioning? I asked. You mean stopped working? I don't need that kind of trouble. It depends on how much you want the dog, she repeats in this cool, patient way. If you want the dog, you have to come up with an emotional problem that having a dog would fix. I could be your problem, for instance. I'm pretty sure she's making fun of me. She already is my problem, and she knows it. When there's a new baby in the family, Daisy explains, wise parents will consider buying a pet for the older sibling. It's to keep the older sibling from feeling neglected. I ask how she knows, and she says she learned it from a talk show. I should have guessed. Daisy has watched more TV in 3 months than I have in my entire life. She was heartbroken when school started and she couldn't watch the soaps anymore. Gratkins has to bring her up to date when she gets back. And this is supposed to be my twin? If you act disturbed long enough, she explains, Gratkins will realize you're getting a poor self-image because she loves me more than she loves you. Why would she do that? I ask. Because I'm smarter and prettier, says Daisy. Give me a break, I say, because I'd sooner die than admit she's right. Daisy says that's not the point. The point is what Gratkins thinks I think she thinks. It won't work, I say. It will so, says Daisy. You try it then. I told you I don't want a dog. Neither do I admit. It's just that a dog would be useful for shepherd's pie. If I act disturbed, I'll do it for a laptop computer. Daisy says a computer would be harder because it costs more than a dog and can't give you love and affection. An emotional problem wouldn't be enough, she says thoughtfully. You'd need a learning disability, too. I tell her I don't have a learning disability, but she says it would be easy to fake one. I remind her that the kids at school with learning disabilities get extra tutoring, not laptop computers. She says the kids at school don't play their cards right. I say I wouldn't want to risk it. I bet you wouldn't either, I say. I would so, says Daisy. You would not, I say. How much do you want to bet? She asks. I say I'll bet $1,000,000. She says I don't have $1,000,000. I say I'll bet anything she likes, but she says she doesn't like anything I have, so she won't bet it after all. Chicken, I say. I didn't say I wouldn't do it, she argues. I just said I wouldn't bet. I want it to be a contest. If I win, I get to keep the computer. That's fine with me, I say, because I'm dead sure she'll lose. I should have known better. Daisy won, and the way she went about it was to spell words wrong. That is, she put the right letters in, but she put them in the wrong place. She did this in all of her classes, not just English. At first the teachers thought she was just being careless. They made her copy things over. But Daisy would stare at the word with a disabled expression on her face and copy it wrong again. Then she would cry. She got extra tutoring, of course, but the tutor had a remedial program on one of the Whetstone Academy computers. Whenever Daisy used the computer, she spelled right. Towards the end of October, the tutor told Gratkins that Daisy had a hand-eye coordination problem. It was really frustrating for Daisy, the tutor explained, to be unable to express all the creative thoughts she had in her eager young mind. In the long run, it would undermine her self-image. In the short run, she should be encouraged to do her homework on her own personal laptop computer, which she got for my 13th birthday. What I got was a dog. I didn't expect to get anything, since Gratkins is always broke, and she had already given me computer lessons. So why the dog? Because Daisy told Gratkins it was what I wanted most in the world. And why did Daisy get the computer on my birthday? Because Gratkins decided it should be Daisy's birthday, too. I thought this was a terrible idea. Gratkins and I happened to have been born on the same day. On October 29th, we always had a special celebration just for the two of us. I wasn't about to share. Daisy has her own room, I reasoned. Why can't she have her own birthday, too? Because people think you're twins, was the obvious answer. I appealed to Daisy. You must have a real birthday. When is it? October 29th, she said stubbornly. Well, don't expect any present from me, I told her. Then I asked Gratkins what she wanted for her birthday. She answered that the nicest present I could give her would be to live in harmony with my new sister. Well, I tried, and I'm still trying, which brings me gracefully back to the present. It took me a long time to write this flashback, so several days have passed since I started it. But in case you're wondering, we did indeed have Shepherd's roadkill pie for lunch. Mrs. Megorian says I've had ample time to write about my childhood. She says I should move out of my past and into my future. Who ever heard of an autobiography of someone's future? The only sure thing about my future is shepherd's pie. Footnote. Mrs. Megorian says every well-documented autobiography has footnotes. They're in case the intelligent reader seeks additional information. I'm sure you want to know what I named my dog, But if you're really intelligent, you already guessed that I named him Laptop. He likes shepherd's pie. Footnote number 2. The computer wasn't all Daisy got. It didn't take long for her to convince Gratkins that it was useless without a printer, for instance, and that she needed the study center desk from Computer Shack to put the printer and computer on, and the orthopedic back saver chair, and the non-glare eye saver lamp. If Daisy said she couldn't do her homework unless she was wearing a 24-karat gold wrist saver bracelet, you can bet your life she'd get that too. But even greed has its limits.